Good morning, everyone. So today, I will be discussing an advanced topic in C# programming. This is all about methods and behaviors. So this is a very important part of developing an application because when you develop an application, you try to develop a very large amount of code that sometimes allows you to have a confusion of, especially when you encounter a logical problem of the program, and it's not easy to debug an application if you have large amount of things that you need to consider. So it's easier to develop small programs because lesser code, lesser mistakes, and lesser code, you can actually identify easily if there are errors that have been found. So when a program is somewhat small, so we can keep all the details of the program in our heads once. Let's say if you just need to compute a simple mathematical calculations, it's easier to identify what are the things that needs to be done because it's just a simple application. But if in real situation, like developing an application, so you are not only talking about 100 lines of code, you're talking about thousands or more lines, so larger. So they are simply too large and complex because there are lots of features that needs to be embedded into that system. So sometimes it cause us some hard time and headaches to perform some logical validation if the program performs the right logic, and building software requires large amount of effort and technique. So that's basically the things that you need to consider. So one solution to that difficulty is managing that complexity. We call that complexity because it's really hard to identify if where in your particular code can we find that bug. Is to manage that part of complexity of your task is to apply what we call modular programming. When we say modular programming, your code is composed of many different code modules. We call that modular. It's like you are trying to create one whole application, but it is subdivided into parts. So the intention of modular programming is to develop different codes that can be developed in separately. Like for example, today may focus on, let's say you're developing an enterprise application. So our focus for today is developing the logic for inventory. And inventory is a part of a big application that requires many features that needs to perform. So this allows different developers to take on different pieces of the system. Sometimes you are not actually the one who solely developed the system, but you are actually composed of teams. Let's say today we will be building a inventory system, but the task is subdivided into several persons. And the problem of subdividing the task is you are not aware of how that person developed the code, and at the end of the day you try to merge that program and make it as one application. It's really hard for you to consolidate how your co-programmers embed their own code into your own program, since your code, your idea is different, or your task is different from their task. So modular programming allows us to subdivide the task, and at the end of the day we will combine them and build the separate code or the separate task into one system. So in order to do that, we need to apply what we call modular programming. In C#, we call that methods. Okay. In my experience, it's easier for me to debug if ever there are errors because I separate different parts of the program into different methods. So if ever one feature of the program requires me to change a certain line, it doesn't require me to redo the entire program itself. So my focus now is to point to a direction where I need to modify a certain line without affecting the entire functionality of the program. Okay, so creating a modular method of developing program allows you to different users or programmer take different pieces of the system and design, implement without having to understand all the rest. Let's say, for example, you're trying to build a project. The problem with building a project with the entire team is if you don't practice modular programming, the entire team must know the entire section, the entire feature of the program. They must understand it well in order to develop the system. But in modular, all you have to do is to understand a certain portion that a program, each individual, that they need to perform each task. For example, a certain task is assigned to you, and that's the only way that you intend to understand that specific task also, that specific task only, something like that. So so building large programs out of modules effectively, so we need to be able to write methods or modules that can we convince ourselves that are in correct isolation from the rest. So meaning when you develop modular or develop module or method, you will become isolated from the rest. Your focus now is on a particular task that needs to be done rather than understanding the entire concept of the program. So that's how enterprise application is being developed by teams. So all you have to do is to understand what you really need to do or what is your contribution to take part into the big system and give the outcome of your task, and ganun lang. So hindi na kailangan tingnan yung big picture. Kailangan nyo lang maintindihan, ito gagawin nyo ngayon, yan ang gawin nyo, at wala na kayong pakialam kung anong gagawin ng kasama nyo ng programmer. Basta ang gawin mo lang, yung task mo, anong hinihingi ng particular method mo, at anong ibabalik niya pag call siya ng ibang parts ng program. So something like that. So why do we need to, aside from making your entire program divided into subtasks, so the reason is it allows us to identify some or satisfy with the respect of the rest of the program the needs of each task. So if ever, just like what your parents do in your at home, if there are several tasks, it is subdivided with your siblings, and wala kang pakialam kung anong gagawin niyo doon sa task na yun. Ang importante, gagawin niyo yun at gagawin mo yung part mo. At the end of the day, natapos yung task na successful at nagawa mo yung dapat mong gawin. Something like that. So, that's the idea of, key idea of modular programming. So, therefore, when building large program that works, we must use an abstraction or an idea of making it manageable and easily to fix whenever the code encounters an error. So in terms of fixing an error, if you have methods when you apply modular programming, it's easier to identify where part of the code need to be fixed, something like that. So it's like you have the property of the components that you need to modify. It's like parts of the motorcycle that if ever a part is being replaced, all you have to do is focus on the part that is need to be replaced rather than thinking of the entire behavior or the functionality of the motorcycle. So something like that. So it's modular programming is like creating an abstraction of a specification of what the program or part or the module needs to do. So it's like a motorcycle, if ever that a certain part is missing or not behaving accurately, so your focus now is focus on that particular part only. So something like that. So creating a good module specification allows you to have a clear, understandable, and allows you to have enough information about what the module, a specific module that needs to be, let's say, needs correction or needs to have some update. So it allows us to have, it allows us to do our job easier because it's modular, part by part. So it is helpful even if there are only one programmer doing the job. So, for example, you are freelancer, if ever na mag-isa ka lang doon sa trabaho or you are just a single programmer, still, modular allows you to manage your time easier. So, something like that. So, in C#, the mechanism of developing module is what we call methods. So, in today's session, this is our objective. Okay. Okay, so wait lang ha. I will pause my recording. Okay. Now, our objective in today's session are the following. Number one, so I already briefly understand the information about methods, and aside from that, I'm also I'm going to discuss about the components of what part a method should have, and we will also distinguishing a call class methods with or without parameters. So when you call a method, paano siya ginagawa with respect to the parameters or without parameters. And also, I'm going to demonstrate some commonly used predefined methods. We have two types of methods. We have the predefined. When we say predefined, it is actually built in your language. Like in C#, we have the math class. Let's say if you want to get the exponent, you use the POW, something like that. And also we've been using several predefined methods in C# like the parse, the convert. So that's the predefined, meaning it's built in your language. So yeah, and we will be revisiting that so that you can have a background of why do we need to create methods and what is the importance of creating a methods. So next is we'll be doing some discussion on how to write a value and non-value returning class methods. So with and without parameters. Later we'll be discussing what parameters is or parameters. We distinguish between value, reference, and out parameter types, and explore the use of name and optional parameters with default value. Okay, so just like what I mentioned a while ago in our introduction to this session, so methods are generally the block of codes or statements in a program that gives the user the ability to reuse. Okay, one of the benefits for me in writing method is that when I intend to develop new project, so I just need to copy a certain method from previous one, so no need to redo it again. So it's convenient for me to just copy the method and apply it without problem encountering into the new project. So that's the purpose of methods. It allows you to you have the ability to reuse the program. Okay, so it actually saves the excessive use of memory, since if you have a method in your program, you don't have to repeat the sequence over and over again. So all you have to do is to call the method if ever you need them, and it will execute as needed it to perform. So basically, it provides better readability of the code. So a method is a collection of statements that perform some specific task. So if ever you have a task in your program and it requires you to perform the right statement that performs several tasks, then my advice is to use method. Most especially if the task can be repeated several times throughout the program. Now, method is different from looping, because looping allows you to repeat statements, while method allows you to repeat or call a group or block of statement as many times as you want. Okay? So, method allows you to send data and return result afterwards, something like that. So, for example, we have this example block of statements in C#, and you have statements. So, this is a program. The task is written sequentially with conditional statements or with looping statements. That's how a usual program is built. So it requires us to develop long sequence. If ever you have a big program, all you have to do is to write a very long sequence to satisfy the needs of the program that needs to be performed. Now, this is an example of a modular-based program. So in this particular example, as you can see, you have what we call the method in button. So when you double-click a button, you specifically write a statement that triggers when the button is clicked. But in this example, in this diagram, we have method number 2, number 3, and number 4. So what's the purpose of that? The intention of this block is for you to be able to specifically write statements that performs tasks. If ever you need that task to execute, all you have to do is to call them in your program. You can actually call them as many times as you like. So that's the purpose of that. So notice you have a separate block for your program. So if ever a certain block provides wrong output, therefore you're focused now on that particular block. Do you understand? You can write your comments in our chat box so that I can monitor if ever there are things that are unclear. So this is what a program with a method looks like. It's like you divide the task into subtasks, and for you to be able to focus on every task, so since it is subdivided, so nagkakaroon kayo ng focus task by task. Okay. So, I hope clear siya. Ngayon, paano siya ginagawa? So, let us discuss what or how method is being made. And before we proceed to that, let us focus first on the understanding of what our methods are and what are the predefined methods. Okay, so I have a meeting 10:30, so kaya pa naman siguro.
Kala ko 10.
Okay, 10:30 daw po.
10:30.
Okay, so predefined methods. So let's revisit the predefined methods. So we call the parse, the convert class. I think you are already familiar with this, especially when we write simple programs that requires us to convert the data from text box and assign it to the variable. We use parse and convert. That is actually a method, a predefined method. We don't really understand what happened behind the code, but as we all know, when you use that, we convert. But we don't really care what the programmers did in that particular code, but what we understand is how to use them and when to use them. That's the purpose. So that's how modular programming works. Let's say this particular task is assigned to programmer number 1. Let's say, for example, let us use some pen. Let's say, for example, you assign this method to a programmer number 1. So you need to create a method that allows us to convert data. So all you have to do is send that output to me and let me know how to use them and when to use them. So tayo naman as a programmer, ang alam lang natin, parse is used to convert data from text box. Kasi when you input data from text box, especially numeric, C# treat that as a string, and you cannot use that to perform mathematical expression unless it is being converted to numeric. So to do that, we use parse. That's actually a method. We don't really care what the programmers did in order to process that, but what we really care about is the usage of that method. Okay, the convert class, okay, we all know that they are the same, but they are different in terms of usage. And math class, okay, we'll be revisiting that. So now let's focus on the call parse. Okay, so we have the predefined static method. Okay, so in parse we have numeric types. Example, if you want to convert the number into double, you use the double.parse. So the C# really don't care how you use it, but what the C# requires us to do is to use it properly. So for example, if the data, let's say you have an input of 4, so that particular data will be converted to double. Okay, so it will become 4.0, something like that. So that's what parse method do. So that's just an example of method. So it has a certain purpose in our program that performs a task. So in this parse method, expects that it has a string argument. This is what you call argument. Okay? So yan yung pinapasa mo sa kanya. Ibig sabihin, pag ginamit mo siya, you need to include a value that requires conversion, something like that. That's what you call an argument. So that when you pass a value to it, it will return a value. Let's say, for example, 4 is an argument, it's a string, and when you use the double.parse, it will be converted to numeric double data type, something like that. So that's what you call the parse, and that's how a method is being used, predefined method. Let's examine the convert. Okay, the convert class is the same, but it has a different implementation. So we write convert that to double. Okay. So example, so int value, we have a value of integer, and we converted the value by string value to integer, something like that. So that's the purpose of convert class. You're already familiar with this since you're already using C# for 1 year already, since we usually use this to retrieve data from text boxes. Now let's focus on math class. So maybe majority of this class has little familiarity with this one. So this is the math class. So if you want to use the math class, just import it into your program. Automatically, when you use that class, it's like in C++, we use the math, if I'm not mistaken, the include to use in specific purpose. Now, example, we just need to we don't need to expound the discussion here. I just want you to understand or identify the purpose. Now, in math class, we have several methods in math class. We have the ab or absolute value. It returns the value of a specific number. Example, If you have a value of negative 88 to 62, absolute value, it will be converted to 88.62. That's the purpose of that. So the method used in that particular task is this one. It is a public int, meaning it returns integer. So when you submit data, it will return a value. Ceiling, which means return smallest whole number greater than or equal to the specific number. So meaning, it actually converts your double into nearest whole number, something like this one. Okay, the cosine, exponent. Okay, so returns a raised to the specified power. So no need to do some long expression in math just to get the exponent. All you have to do is to use the function xp. Okay, something like that. The floor, the log, logarithmic or logarithm function, the max returns the larger of two specified numbers if you want to compare. Okay. Minimum, the power returns specified number of raised to the power of number, something like that. So those are the round returns the nearest specified value of the number. So for example, ira-round off niya. Okay, so ganun lang. So those are some example of math function. So from time to time, I'm actually browsing your chat. So far wala pa naman. But anyway, let's continue. So next, okay. In writing method, in user-defined methods, so we have user-defined methods. We have two types of user-defined methods. When you say user-defined, you are the one who will be developing this particular method. So predefined means embedded, already made. User-defined, customized method of or customized way of writing your own methods. Okay, so let's explore one at a time. So let's focus first on the void method. So what is the void method? So the void method performs a task and then terminates. So it's just, you call it, and it performs a task and exits. It does not return a value back to the statement that called it. Unlike what I have mentioned a while ago, this one returns a value, diba? So when you submit a data, let's say for example, when you submit convert to integer, you type string 34, something like that. This value is being returned but in integer format. This will be 34. So may binabalik. Pero pag void, wala. Ano po? So wala siyang binabalik. Ang kailangan mo lang gawin, you just define that into your C# program, add some statement, you call it, and that's it. Okay. So what are the parts of a method? Okay. Methods, we have two parts, the method header and a body. So a method header, which appears at the beginning of a method definition, you need to list several important things about the method. So when you declare a method, it requires a header that lists important things of what the method requires, especially the method name. A method body is a collection of statements, valid C# statement that performs a task or that performs statements that needs to be executed, something like that. Okay? So this is an example of a method. So this method just simply displays message box on the user screen. Okay, so this is how you write a method. You have a private, void. This is what you call method header, and this is what you call a method body. So you can include here any C# statements like input-output, the sequence, the loop, any statement so far that I have discussed, pwede nyong ilagay dito since valid statement naman siya. Ano po? So, let us examine the statement. Now, in method header, we have four particular parts of a method header. Okay? So, a method header contains access modifier. So, this is an access modifier. Okay? So, what is an access modifier? Let me erase that one. An access modifier is a keyword. So, keyword private. So, this is an access modifier private. Is an access modifier. So, when a method is declared a private, it can be called only by the code inside the same class. It's like private declaration means when you create a method, doon lang siya sa form magagamit. Just like, let me give an illustration. What's the difference between private and other access modifiers? Let's say, for example, when you say private, let's say you have a house. Okay. Okay. Pag sinabing private, okay. So, yung possession mo, pag private, hanggang doon lang sa bahay. Pag sinabing public, kahit sino, pwedeng ma-access yan. Correct? So, when you develop C# application, it requires several forms. Diba? Let's say, you have forms for getting data, you have forms for displaying result. So, when you use private method, the method is being used only into the class who defined it. Okay? So, let's say you have a class, like for example, let's have some example here. So, in this example, we have a form here. Ayan. So, nakikita po ba siya? Nakikita po ba? Okay. Now, saan makikita yung class? Okay. Double-click natin yung button. Okay. Let's say for example, ito yung class method definition ko. Makikita mo siya sa loob ng class at ang pwede lang mag-access sa kanya ay yung class na to, yung form 1. Hindi mo siya pwede ma-access sa ibang form kasi naka-private siya. Unlike public, pwede ma-access ng ibang form. Gets na? Public and private. So we'll be dealing with that by next few discussions. Okay. Aside from access modifier, we have return type. When we say return type meaning what value that this method returns. In this case, void, meaning it doesn't return any value coming from the method or line that calls it, something like that. So it does not return any value. Okay? Meaning wala siyang binabalik na value pag ginamit mo siya. Okay? And the third part is the method name. What are you going to call your method? So I suggest you need to provide descriptive name. Let's say, I want to create a method that computes bill. So lagay mo dito, bill or bill calculator, something like that. Something that can easily be recognized as a purpose of that method. And aside from that, we have parentheses. So this is very important because later we'll be adding value to a parentheses. So that's the part of the method header. Okay. In general, the method name is the name that you are going to use to access this particular method. Okay, so that is very important. So in this discussion, I will be using the Pascal case method names, meaning capital letter. Okay. By the way, first letter is small and capital letter yung second word. Okay. If I suggest camel case is advisable, or just perform this normal case methods, capital letters yung first word. Okay, so something like that. So, yun. Now, in parentheses, balik tayo sa parentheses. So, it's actually the container of the value that you need to submit. In this case, since void siya, and you don't want any operation that is being performed inside here, just statements, so wala kang ipapasa na value sa kanya. Ano po? Okay. Take note, the general format, the method declaration requires these curly braces to define the block. So do not forget that. So when your method is executed after this line, so it will be terminated and it will go back to your program. Okay? So let's proceed. Okay, method body. So, beginning at the line after the method header, one or more statements appear inside a set of curly braces. So, these statements are the method's body and are performed anytime the module is executed. Okay. So, where do we put method? So, our method should be declared inside the class form. So, this one. Okay? So, meaning, bago magtapos yung dalawang curly brace, kasi yung first curly brace is doon sa ating namespace, yung pangalawang closing curly brace ay doon sa class form natin. So, therefore, dito nyo siya ilalagay. Bawal sa labas, dito lang sa part na to. Okay? I-insert nyo sa dyan. Okay? Okay. How do you call a method? Let's say you declared a method. How do we call them? So when you declare a method, so when calling them, method executes when it is called. So automatically, execute siya. So hindi naman siya mag-execute pag hindi mo siya tinawag. So the method are executed by method call statements. Okay. When a method is called, the program branches to that method and executes the statement in its body. So example, we have a button here. And the purpose of that button is when you click that, it will display statements or execute statements. We have 3 statements here. In the first statement, we display a message box. And the second statement, we call the method. This is how you call the method. You just call their names, something like that. Since our method doesn't require a value from calling it, so no need to specify value from the parentheses. So just write them down just like this one. And when you call that method, what will happen is the C# will go directly to that method and execute the line inside the method. So when you call them, after this statement, it will go directly to the method that you define and execute this task. After executing the task, it will be ended and go directly back to the next statement to the method who called it. This is what you call click method from a button. So the caller is the button click of the button. So when you call the display message, it will go here, and after executing and done executing it, it will go back to the button again to execute the several lines inside that method. Okay? Clear? Please tell me if ever hindi siya clear. Okay, ano na lang. Okay, kung wala, let's continue. Okay, next. May meeting kami 10:30. Okay, so let's go to the next. Okay, now, kanina we have a method that void pero wala siyang laman. Okay, wala siyang laman. So kung gusto natin lagyan ng laman yan, we call that arguments. So an argument is any piece of data that is passed into the method. So when you call a method, you want to put a data to it so that the method can perform a specific task using that data. So we put argument to the methods. Okay? So a piece of data that are sent into a method are known as argument. So the method can use its arguments in calculation or other operation. So for example, we have this In message box, di ba meron tayong message box method, message box show. Di ba, you call the show method. So, pinasa mo hello world. So, that's why in message box, when it appears, it display hello world. Also, when you call the int.parse, you pass an argument, a string argument, so that when this parse is being called, it will perform a task to convert the argument, string argument, and convert it to numeric. That's what an argument is all about. Okay? Now, how do we create an argument? So, to create an argument, we create parameters into our method. Okay, let me clear this one first. An argument is the value that you pass to the method. A parameter is the variable that is being declared inside the method. Meaning, when this method is developed, this requires a parameter data. So, when you call this method, the user requires to include an argument. Let's go back. This is what you call argument. Kasi ginamit natin yung parse, nagpasa tayo ng data, and that data is called argument. But, when you declare a method, ang tawag natin sa definition sa loob ng parentheses is parameter. Okay. So, parameter variable is often simply called a parameter. It is a special variable that receives an argument when a method is called, which means this is now your argument, and when you submit or call the method display value, pinapasa yon sa parameter ni method. That's why yung file na pinasa mo, papasok yun sa variable na value. Yun ang gagamitin niya para i-process yung task niya sa loob ng method. Gets? Okay, malinaw po ba? Another example. So, let's say for example, you have a method display value and you want that value to process, let's say for example, gawa tayo ng example dito. Okay, let's say for example, gawa tayo ng another method. So, any part of this line, up to this line, pwede kayo mag-declare ng method. As long as hindi sa labas nito, reserve na natin yung method na tong public sa pinakataas. So, gawa tayo sa pinakataas na lang. Okay, private, void, let's say, evaluate. Okay. Number. So, let's say, int num. So, in this example, let me maximize this one. Okay, para malinaw. Okay. So, this is my method. My method is private. It is a void, meaning it doesn't return a value. It has a name, evaluate number, and it has parameter. So, if you are discussing a method, this is what you call parameter. It requires numeric argument to be used, or if you want to use this method, it requires an argument because in my definition, I use parameter. So, let's say if num%2, something like that. So, message box, oops, I forgot, equal 0. So, message box that show, sabihin natin, even number siya. Even number. Okay. So, lagyan natin ng ganyan. Para cute naman tingnan sa output. Okay. Okay. Plus. Kung maglalagay ako ng single quote. Okay. Is even number. Okay. Something like that. Okay. Else. So, add number. Oops, nakalimutan ko lagyan ng quotation, curly brace. Ayan. Okay, so now, this is my entire block. Okay. So, copy paste tayo. So, in this case, this would be add number. Add number. So, in my definition, my method definition, so this method defined with a parameter. So when we call this method, it requires an argument. So let's try. So let me comment this one out and let's call. So let's say we have called the method, and notice when I type the method, it requires a numeric argument. This is now what you call argument. Let's say 13. Okay, semicolon. And this is a statement that calls this particular method. So let us try to run this one. Okay, now as you can see, I have now the form. Okay, and okay, when I click this button, it will execute this one. Okay, so let's put some breakpoint here. The purpose of breakpoint is for me to be able to trace back what happened inside my program. So, okay, now click go button. So when I click the button, it proceeds to this line. Since this is the only line I have, so I need to press F11. Notice after reading this one, it will go up to my method. So let me hover this particular line. So we have evaluate number. When I hover the numeric, notice the value of the parameter num. So in this parameter num, it receives the argument that is passed to this method. So when I submit 13, that value 13 is being passed to my parameter. So evaluate na siya. So the result will now determine if the number is odd number. So since it is not divisible by 2, so odd number siya. Okay, something like that. So let's let's modify this one. Let's say 24 F5. So even number. So it has a specific purpose. So notice what will happen if I use it again. So as you can see, I don't have to write multiple times the statement like this one. Okay, so for me to be able to use it, all I have to do is to create a method and write several values to it, something like that. 17. So I can call method as many as I like. So notice I don't have to write it 4 times. See, that's the purpose of method. If ever this method returns a wrong output, then my focus now is pointed here, not in the entire program. So imagine if you have this method written several times. So it's time consuming. 1, 2, 3, 4. Since I have 4 numbers that I need to evaluate, so I have to write them 4 times. And if ever this statement returns a wrong result, I need to modify it 4 times. So it's time consuming and not practical for creating a program. So that's why creating methods allows me to create a practical way of writing my program. So let's try. So expect message box will appear 4 times. Okay, 24 is even number, 15 is odd, 12 is even, and 17 is odd number. So that's how a method works, and that's what parameter is all about. Parameter is the value that is being required by the method to use as its value to evaluate, something like that. You can add multiple parameters, like let's say int num2, which means you need to include 2 numbers. Let's say 25. Notice nyo, it displays an error because the parameter of the evaluate number is 2 integers. So when I call the method, I am required to submit 2 arguments. Okay. Something like that. See? So when you create parameters, valid parang it's like declaring a variable. Okay? Now, when you declare parameter or when you create parameter inside the method, the lifespan of this variable is only at this particular method only. You cannot use it outside the parameter. Meaning, when you create variable here, now, it doesn't affect the variable inside the method because this variable is independent to this variable inside the method. So, the scope of this method variable parameter is only at the method declaration itself or definition itself rather. Okay, let's continue. Okay. So, passing values as expression, so you can do this one instead of variable. Instead of variable, you can do some expression like this one, or directly you can parse the string, convert it to the numeric data, and submit it to methods. You can use it. Okay, so that's how void method is being used. Okay, take note. Compatibility. You can pass only string arguments into string parameters. So if the parameter requires a string, you need to submit arguments with string values. So, hindi pwedeng incompatible types. You can pass int arguments into int, but you cannot pass double or decimal into int, since integer has decimal, while decimal and double has decimal points. You can pass either double or int arguments into double. Okay, which means double or int pwede mong ipasa sa double kasi when you pass int, automatic magiging double siya. You cannot pass decimal values into double parameters kasi magkaiba sila ng type. Okay, although they have the same decimal point, but decimal has limited memory allocation, that's why magkaiba sila. You can pass either decimal or int argument to decimal, but you cannot pass double arguments into decimal parameters. In summary, you cannot pass incompatible types like string to integer. You need to parse it first before. Let's say for example, the method requires integer and you submit string, di pwede unless pig-convert mo muna siya sa integer. You cannot submit integer to decimal or double because they are incompatible types. So please remember these notes. Okay, parameter variable scope. Oh, I already discussed this one, so I guess it's clear now. So the scope of variable inside the parameter is actually limited only inside the variable or the method definition itself. Okay. So the parameter variable scope is the method in which the parameter is declared. So no statement outside the method can access the parameter variable. So hindi mo na ma-access yung laman ng method variable mo outside the method. Okay. Name arguments. You can create name arguments. For example, you can call the parameter, when you call the method, you can identify the variable and assign value to it. Something like this one. So as you can see, I have show method here, and in declaring this method, it has two parameters when it is declared, the last name and the first name. So you can call a method using calling the name arguments like this one and the value that you need to assign to this variable. Okay. In short, this variable is declared as a parameter in this particular method. So parang it's like directly mong sinasabi na, oh, last name, ang laman mo is Smith. O first name, ang laman mo Suzanne or Suzanne, something like that. So unlike previous example, you just assume that you submit a value. But this time, you name the argument and the value, the argument will be assigned, something like that. Okay. You can also create optional arguments. When you say optional, you know optional, what's optional? Meaning, when you call the method, you may or may not add an argument to it. In this definition of method, we have a decimal price which is required every time that you use the method. You are required to submit this data, this argument. But in the second parameter, it has an optional value also required. By the way, I forgot, this is actually default arguments, meaning when you declare parameter, I'm not talking about optional, sorry, I scratched that. When we see default argument, when you use default argument, you ask or define a default value. Okay? Something like that. So when you call the default, yun, nagiging parang option, yeah, tama ako kanina. Parang default ano na siya, default value na siya. So, pwede mong tawagin si method kahit walang second argument. Kasi yung second argument mo may default na. So, nagiging optional na lang yung second argument mo. In this method, parang optional na lang si second parameter. Kasi meron na siyang value. Hindi na siya makaka-encounter ng error kasi may value na siya. Something like that. Okay? So, yun. I hope, clear siya. So, you can, when you declare default argument, it must be literal or constant. Literal means kagaya nito, literal. It can be constant. Okay? Like, this const, decimal, etc. You can provide default arguments for all the parameter. Pwede mong at least, alam price equals to 0. Pwede mong iset. You can, however, when you only, some of the parameters have default argument, you must declare parameters with the default, argument last. So, kung magde-declare ka daw ng parameter dito sa, method mo, so kung meron kang default, i-declare mo daw siya sa last part na ng argument list mo, or parameter list rather. Okay? So, as you can see, when I call the show tax, nagpasa ako ng 100, papasok yun sa price. Yung second argument is none, therefore, automatic tax rate is 0.07 decimal, something like that. Okay? So, that's... So, ngayon, meron kami emergency meeting. So, I will be posting the next schedule, continuation. So, I'm afraid to say na kailangan na natin munang putulin yung discussion because I have important meeting that I have to attend. This is an emergency meeting. So, yun. I will be posting the siguro di muna tayo mag-attend since hindi naman tayo masyado tumagal. Tumagal ba tayo? 1 hour din mahigit. Sige. Hanapin ko lang yung attendance. I will post the next schedule within this week. I just need to attend the meeting since I'm required to attend. Okay. Wait lang ha. Sorry, naputol yung ating discussion. Ay nako. Okay, I will be